the federal case, which you're very familiar with, and you have a state case, and usually the federal case will supersede the state case, but not in this case.
Well, this is why I'm uncomfortable with what I read last night. I think that this conduct is essentially covered by the federal indictment. Not with the level of detail that they cover it in this, but that's just a stylistic thing.
Here we got Lindsey Graham, Christie doing his best impression of Lindsey Graham, doing the flippity-flop, flappity-jack Smith. I don't know. No, Christie, a woman that wears uncomfortable shoes because they look good, that's a style problem, being uncomfortable. This is completely different. But of course, Christie needs to put himself out there in the media saying something. He needs to be saying something. He's got to be in the middle of something right now because he wants to be the president, Mr. Flippity-flop, flappity-jack Smith. But if you would actually look at the nuances of the case, you would see that this case is about a whole bunch of people using the RICO Act. And the RICO Act in Georgia is way more substantial than in most places, so they can use it on way more things like perjury, etc. And you can't do that on the federal level. And Georgia also has stricter laws governing the conditions of release that lean towards pre-trial detention, including a requirement that defendants show they pose no risk of intimidation to witnesses. Given Trump's history, imagine the challenge that presents for his lawyers when he's arraigned, probably later this month. There's a lot of federal-friendly loopholes for Donald Trump on the federal side. So on the state side, it leaves that stuff out. The biggest loophole they close out, being pardoning himself.
Election interference is election interference. It's been charged by Jack Smith, and most of the time, what you'd see here would be a state court deferring to a federal prosecution, especially if that federal indictment had already been issued. So I think this was unnecessary.
Speaking of unnecessary, this whole interview, unnecessary. So I had to make a video exposing how unnecessary it really was.
As to Donald Trump. Now, remember, as to the other defendants, Jack Smith chose not to charge them.
Which is reason number one, this is such a big deal that they do this in state court, not just federal court. It's because all the other defendants in the federal court were all given immunity. They didn't have to worry about getting in trouble. They now have to worry about getting in trouble. So now they're going to all start turning on each other. They're going to be like rats jumping ship, and it's going to be glorious. That's number one. Number two, state crimes cannot be pardoned by the president of the United States. They can only be pardoned by the governor of that state, and the governor of Georgia is the one and only Brian Kemp. And I don't see Brian Kemp pardoning Donald Trump for election interference anytime soon, especially 2020 election interference that involved him. So this upcoming election is probably going to be turned into people voting to keep Donald Trump out of jail and people voting to keep Donald Trump in jail. That's what this is about. That's what this is all about. And this brings me to exactly why I've been saying for so long why the DOJ has dragged its feet on the Donald Trump investigations and indictments. This is why. Because they wanted the election to be turned into this. They know Joe Biden can't win on his own merits. They know that people aren't passionate enough about Joe Biden to go out and vote for Joe Biden. They know the only way to turn this election into a fruitful election is for people to be voting for or against Donald Trump. That is it. And that's why I've been saying if you take Donald Trump out of the election, period, Joe Biden fucking loses. But I digress. This video isn't about Joe Biden, how bad he sucks. Which brings me back to Donald Trump. People can't just pardon themselves for crimes they've committed. What does the law even mean to a grifter like Donald Trump if you keep getting off on your crimes and can pardon yourself for your crimes when you believe you're a fucking mob boss and you act like a mob boss in the open talking about, hey, you guys owe me loyalty. The loyalty, say, the loyalty. Like, come on, man. Marlon Brando much? Stop it with that shit. And if you think you can get away with that shit in the real world...
Quick question. Can you clarify in Georgia the mandatory minimum when it comes to RICO charges, whether it's servable by probation or how that might play out?
The RICO charges has time that you have to serve, so it's not a probated sentence.
We all heard Donald Trump's feelings on the Fifth Amendment. Only criminals and crooks invoke their Fifth Amendment. I would never do that. Never, never, never. And then he invoked it like over 500 times. Okay? He also said he would never accept a plea deal in this Georgia case.
Is there any chance you take a plea deal in Georgia?
If we did nothing wrong, we don't ever take a sir. Yes, sir. We don't take plea deals. It's a wise guy question. Are you just a wise guy?
And here is Mr. Wannabe, wise guy, acting like a wise guy, talking like a wise guy, Mr. Wannabe, wise guy. I have a feeling this motherfucker would accept 1,000 plea deals, not to get the punishment that's coming down this motherfucker's road.